Let's have a look at the stock knife. Before I go into any specific details about the knife itself, let's go ahead and see how it works. Here I have a little scoop pattern drawn out on a piece of wax myrtle, which is a fairly unusual wood to be carving, but it works quite nicely, but it tends to be twisty. So I've got this kind of warped, cockeyed look in the blank, but that's okay. It's kind of whimsical looking. I'm not going to try to remove too much of that. I'll just leave it in there. It'll be fine, since this is just a little scoop. Of course, the first thing I'm going to do is profile the thing by removing waste from the sides until I get to any concave or convex surfaces. And this thing has some nice round surfaces on it to really show you how it works. And this particular style of knife is what you might consider the standard stock knife, I believe. And it's made for being really good at cutting carved surfaces. The grind is very similar to a scissor grind on a carving axe, so the more flat side is facing away from me. So it is a tool that is left or right-handed, and of course I'm right-handed, so this is a righty tool. Bench rumbling around. This would be better done with the legs of this thing stuck into some soft earth, but it's quite cold outside right now and windy. Now, when using this, you have more control and more power up here, closer to the hook that's in the sinks it into the bench or attaches it to the bench, and less control as you start to move up. Now, obviously, for every cut, you can't have it real high up here. So you're mostly working with either the middle towards the back. The front here really comes in handy when which you'll see in a minute, when you're cutting like a round surface right here. Lots of control, and it cuts the end grain nicely. Now, the heel up here is particularly useful for what I'm about to do. When you have a curved surface like this, you know, most of the time, I don't want to say most of the time, but I always, in the past, have made relief cuts with a saw and then just knocked it out with a chisel. Or you can kind of do that with an axe too, but it's not easily controlled, or it's not as controlled as well, and you have lots of score marks and more risk of damaging the piece. But here, if you're careful, and there's still risk of damage if you over travel and split something out, but you have more control to get closer to your sketch, if your sketch is worth anything, and your finished blank is easier to go ahead and get your carving knife into. You're not having to deal with scoring or cleaning up saw cuts or anything, cleaning up the depth cuts. But you can see, you know, I'm not, and this is a short piece, so I can get mine a little bit closer up here, but on really long spoons or longer spoons, you can't really do that, and you have to get in here with the heel. And it, you know, it works. It's not, you can feel it has less control, but I mean, we are talking about a stock knife, and they are easily controlled to begin with, so it's not a great big deal. But you know, that's not the finished surface, and I'm no expert. I've only been using this thing for a week and a half now, but we've got this nice smoothed out surface with relatively minimal effort, and that's the beauty of these things. You're not killing yourself using them. And while, you know, a spoon blank or something on an axe is not, I mean, you should be able to do that as well. You can't carry around a stock knife in the woods, or at least I don't think most people would. Not a big one anyway, but it's very easy to use. It's in terms of strength and whatnot. It's really the tool is doing most of your work for you for the power. Now, these aren't particularly useful for dry things, especially in the end grain. You can cut dry stuff with it, but I'll show you in a minute when we get to the end grain cutting that it'll tear, and no matter how sharp and well honed it is, it'll still tear end grain. Or leave it rough if the wood is dry, at least so far in my limited experience. So that's pretty close. And I usually follow the sketch edge first and then push it back. It's kind of what I'm going for here. But yeah, much smoother product you can take your knives to later. So we've got a little bit of a rounded handle here, and this is where the end here really shows its usefulness. Well, if I can get the right angle on it. Just so much power to easily tackle corner pieces and end grain. Quite fine cuts. So still a little lumpy looking, but there's a lot of material in the back here that I'll need to go ahead and remove. Take as much off the back as you need, and then round up the bowl section. You know, and thinking about it now, one of the other advantages would be where you could try to split that out, but in really twisty stuff like this, you might lose too much material. Whereas here, you can kind of control it more. It's still obviously possible to split stuff out with this, but it's more difficult than just trying to throw everything out, or more difficult to accidentally split more than you want. If any of that makes any sense. And now, since this is a scoop, I want the bowl to be reasonably deep. I'm going to remove altogether too much on the bottom here. Probably good. And ooh. Let's see how far back I can get that. Man, these twisty spoons are fun. If you've got a wood that's not got a really interlocked grain, that is. So let's go ahead and round up this bowl, and this is the real fun part, in my opinion. I guess I wouldn't remove that flat off, but we can get it up close to the end here. Again, I'm no expert, so this isn't perfectly clean, but doing that with your knife, it's going to take a lot longer. It's really nice for ingrain like this. And it also kind of looks bad because this particular wood gets stained by iron, like oak or something. Must have a lot of tannin in it. You can see that's cutting in grain and not tearing out. So go ahead and round the bowl. Flip it over, start to define the neck a little more on the edges. The only kind of weirdness about using this that comes up is having to lean over it, which if you're doing this a lot would probably get old, but the larger the item, the less you have to lean over it, so And this is quite a short little article to be trimming up. But you know, you can take little nibbles off of it. It's like being able to precisely control your Sloyd knife with a really powerful cut. It's just so nice to use. Not to try to brag about my having made this tool, but more so the design of the tool itself, because I can hardly claim that I invented the thing. It's just a really ingeniously designed tool. It might be because I know where they came from, or just my own nonsensical perception, but this tool strikes me as being a kind of English thing. It's quite clever. Whereas a lot of the time your idea for Sloyd tools, which is very Scandinavian, is more on the line of try to keep things as simple as possible. You know, don't use a saw where you can use an axe type stuff. Maybe that's oversimplifying it a little bit, but this is a similar idea. Whereas this, while the tool itself is simple, it's definitely adding a very distinct mechanical advantage for certain things with a non-mobile or less mobile setup. You've got more components, and you know, you have to have the eye sunk into the bench and all that, so it's probably less in the spirit of Sloyd than just using an axe, but I still think it counts, especially considering the prevalence of power tools. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but if we're just sort of discussing Sloyd. So I've got this rough thing blocked out, and of course that would look terrible if that was as far as I was going to go with the finish, but I can keep on, you know, rounding, trimming, making it look a tad better. But really, this is for making the blanking stuff out, and it does that quite nicely. Of course, you can clean that up with your spoke shave and your draw knife, or your Sloyd knife, excuse me. Anyway, that's quite a nice little thing there. As to the tool itself, you have the very sharp angle on the side facing you. There's my logo, which I placed a little bit too far down. Given this is the first one I made, I realized I needed a higher grind than I was originally expecting, so we'll have to move that up. And of course, you have your hook just drawn down here, and your handle, and you can see the thickness where I left. That's just the surface of the old leaf spring, which, by the way, is from a 1940 International school bus. And your boat paddle handle up here with the little sort of S-shaped hook. Some of them are straight, some of them are hooked. I liked the look of this hooked one. I feel like I can get a good grip on it that way. And the forging in this one is a little rough in places. I didn't bother cleaning it up too much because I wasn't actually sure if I was gonna be able to make this thing work. But I think I've proven that the concept is sound. Just needs a little refinement. And another thing to note, the blade is not perfectly straight. It's cambered a little bit, which I don't recall if I mentioned a moment ago, but the reason this cuts so nicely, I think, is because it's always on a skew cut. You always have, no matter how far down you're cutting, you're always scissoring into the grain, and that's increased a little bit by a cambered blade, or perhaps even more so by an incurvate blade, as some of them are. They kind of look, they have like a sort of scythe blade looking arrangement. But yeah, sort of a scissor grind thing. And this side is not flat. It's not chisel ground. It's got a little bit of a grind that way, which, you know, is to remove some of the pitting here that was just on the leaf spring, and it needs a little bit of a scissor grind to it, I think. Overall, really, I suppose that's all there is to show. You get an idea for how it works. That one in particular. Let's see, which ones have I made? Yeah. So there's some more spoons that, while they've been finished with, obviously finished but not sanded with a knife, but these were all done on the stock knife. That's another piece of wax myrtle, the real crazy twisty looking one. That's a little wax myrtle coffee scoop kind of thing. It's a skillet spoon, spatula type thing. These are really nice. Or I like these flat-ended spoons. And these two are birch, which is a really nice wood to carve with this. And I will add, these things are particularly useful on fine-grained carving woods. You know, in my simple testing, they don't seem to work quite as well with really coarse, dry, hard stuff, or like oak or ash. It's harder on them. Just to have some extra fun. I know this is probably getting long in the tooth, but whatever. We'll just chop some ingrain here on a piece of birch. Doesn't that sound lovely? Isn't it just lovely? I can go and damn near cut a flat section off the end. We still have a nice, smooth, clean shear. It just shears that end grain off like nothing else. It does not do that when the wood is green, or when the wood is dry, though. Anyway, that is the stock knife.